So there's this one ancient sacred text that's supposed to be filled with these meditative expressions that they're supposed to be repeated and recited so that the sages and gurus can use them for meditation in order to attain this greater proximity to the divine. The idea was not only would repeating the sacred text draw you closer toward the divine, it's supposed to gradually leave this imprint on your soul that would make you more capable of living life in a competent way, to rise above the troubles of life and find greater coherence with the divine vision. The problem was, the problem with those meditative expressions in that text is that as they were passed down over the ages, they ended up being used by people who didn't understand them as meditations, and they ended up being misunderstood and misused as kind of simplistic formulas, kind of like fortune cookies or, whatever. So they were originally created by elites with their original intent being to train the ruling class in that culture and to train the ruling class with the meditative tradition of the gurus. The original model was that the kings and princes would have memorized the stuff in order to seek experiential transformation, in order to kind of imprint the divine perspective onto their inner self so they could rule from spiritual insight and justice rather than from greed for power or greed for admiration, that kind of thing. But the problem with this sacred text was that over the ages, it came into the hands of careless readers who kind of misunderstood them to be a collection of cliches and simplistic formulas. So they ended up being read by masses of people, kind of more in the mindset of two-dimensional Google search results, rather than being read by people with the reverence and rumination of a meditative text. So I would argue this particular sacred text has become one of the most undervalued collections of such sayings in the genre. You could say kind of hidden in plain sight. You might have thought I was talking about the Tao Te Ching or something else from that, one of those traditions. I'm actually talking about the Mishle Shlomo. It's an ancient Hebrew text originally developed to train the ruling class of Israel and understood to provide practical mindsets for wise and reverent living, intended to be internalized through reflective meditative repetition and recitation. And you may have heard of this under a different name. You may have heard of it under the name of the Book of Proverbs. Problem is, a proverb in English is a trite cliche that we can throw around pretty easily and we can instantly understand, such as the early bird gets the worm. That'd be a proverb. So in English, proverbs aren't sacred expressions of the divine vision, carefully created for extensive meditation, memorization, and spiritual enlightenment. But unfortunately, that's how many people kind of intuitively categorize this book, this single most identifiable expression of the Jewish sacred wisdom tradition. If you open up to the first verse of the Book of Proverbs in most English Bibles, they use the word in English proverb, and the word translated proverb there in verse 1 in most English Bibles is actually a fairly broad Hebrew term, mashal, which is a synonym for the Greek word parabole, which in the New Testament is translated parable. Both of those separate words they basically have a very similar, almost identical semantic range, referring to cryptic expressions used to communicate hidden insight and wisdom. And that could take place through intriguing poetry, meditative riddles, short allegorical stories like Jesus told. Could be through paradox. And yes, it could be also through two one-liners or two-liners that look an awful lot like a trite aphorism. But what a mashal is not intended to be is a two-dimensional simplistic formula, like an English proverb, early bird gets the worm. That's the unfortunate miscategorization that is pretty widespread, that has caused many people to find Hebrew wisdom literature, such as Proverbs and Job, to be uninteresting and irrelevant. I mean, who would want to read a book full of too many cooks spoil the broth and many hands make light work? While English proverbs like those ones do contain some wisdom, certainly, but they don't keep giving the more you meditate on them, the way true wisdom sayings do. In other words, the amount of significance and meaning within a typical English proverb, such as early bird gets the worm, is that amount of meaning and significance. It's equivalent to the two-dimensional formulaic first impression that you get instantly when you hear it. On the other hand, the best of the material found in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and let's say the sayings of Jesus, that they just get richer and richer the more you meditate on them. They don't have their most significance and meaning when you have your two-dimensional formulaic first impression. Here's my challenge for you. Take the sayings of Agur in Proverbs 30, or take the sayings of Jesus in the second part of Luke 6, and go for a walk. And as you go, pull out your phone and take a look at one of these sayings. I'm not talking about the whole thing of it. I'm talking about one of the, one or two line, an individual saying, and then spend 2 to 5 minutes on each saying. You can repeat it subvocally at a slow and unhurried pace, allowing its significance and meaning to expand and explore within your mind. As you get more comfortable with it, then maybe allow images or visual expressions to form where appropriate. You can just kind of step experientially into the connotations of the words, the emotional connotations, and the associations of the saying as a whole. Focus patiently and calmly on each word, one after another, weighing and experiencing the significance each one contains. And then, while you're still kind of repeating it subvocally at a gentle and unhurried pace, then start thinking about interpretations, because a lot of these have a lot of ambiguity, a lot of different angles and ways you can look at it. So gently and slowly think about the interpretations one after another in an unrushed manner, exploring and experiencing the ambiguities, the various implications, that significations you could have, and all the various downhill ramifications to these ideas. The most meaningful of these wisdom sayings can keep on giving for a very, very long time. And that's why they are wisdom sayings, not cliches. And this is how meditation can leave you with more on the inside rather than less, more meaning, more insight, more warmth, more light. Can leave you with a centeredness that makes it easier to take one more step in an uncertain world. In my next video in this series, I'm going to go a little more in depth, particularly into the words of Agur in Proverbs 30, and start talking a little bit about how what kinds of cultural and linguistic factors might get in the way of modern people like us understanding Agur as we meditate on these things and gain the kind of centeredness and insight and life competence that you're supposed to. But how we do, because of where we are in world history and because of the distance we have from when these were formulated and put down in writing, how some of that stuff can get in the way, and we might not get some of what the ancient Hebrews would. So I'm going to start a series. I'm just going to talk through the context of the words of Agur and walk through each one and talk about some valuable insights that are contained there, which you can gain both in an objective sense and get insight that's actually there for all people in all time, according to the sacred tradition of the Hebrews, as well as subjective stuff. That's where you have the objective stuff, and then through personal meditation over time, repeating and reciting and reflecting on these things, how it can be internalized into your own life and actually change the way you see the universe and yourself. So see you then.